All right, welcome everybody to Poker Math 101. I'm Tombos21, and today I'll be teaching Mr. Joey Ingram the basics of poker math. Welcome, Joey.
Let's get it. Good to be here, Tombos. Yeah, I think one of my favorite videos of yours is on poker math on your channel, and I've never really got an actual lesson on poker math before, so I wanted to sharpen up my skills, and what better guy to do it with than you. So happy you put this together. Let's get into it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm basically going to try and just tackle this with a holistic approach because I think a lot of people get confused over these different concepts, MDF and pot odds. To me, these concepts are basically extremely similar. So when a poker player talks about pot odds, what they're saying is, what percentage of the pot do I need to win to profitably call? And pot odds are intimately related with bluffing frequency. So what percentage of the time do I need to bluff to get their bluff catchers to pay off my value bets? These two are the same thing, essentially, on the river at least. If you make a bet on the river, you are laying some pot odds to your opponent. And the pot odds you lay to your opponent should essentially match the amount of time that you're bluffing when you bet. And then on the other side, we have MDF and alpha. And I think a lot of people get these two concepts mixed up, like MDF and pot odds. But these ask a fundamentally different question. MDF and alpha are two sides of the same coin. Alpha just asks, how often does my opponent need to fold for my bluff to be good? And MDF is the flip side of that. How often do I need to defend to prevent them from profitably bluffing? So let me try this. Joey, you order a pizza with 3 friends.
Okay.
What percentage of the pie should you get?
1/4.
Right. That's correct, because it's you plus 3 friends, 4 people total. And therefore you should get 1/4 of the pizza, right? Pretty straightforward, seems very intuitive. Now let's try a poker version of this. Villain bets half pot. So you're getting 3-1. What percentage of the pot should Joey get in order to call?
So probably 1/4 of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You can imagine up here, the pot is 2 pieces, and your opponent bets half pot. If you match their bet, you should win at least 1/4 of the pot after calling in order to break even on your call. Now, in reality, we don't want just a 1/4 pot. We would love more than that, but this is the bare minimum. This is as much as you need in order to get it done, right?
You're basically saying when you call the half pot, you're not necessarily expecting to win the full pot, or even with half the pot, you're really expecting to win 1/4 of the pot.
On average, yeah.
On average.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Meaning,
And so,
you got to be fine losing a lot on the river when you call.
yes, and this is something we're going to kind of experience together, because it's all good and well to just say, well, you should win this much or that much. Here's the numbers. But until you actually experience it, well, you don't really understand it. All right, so let's dive into an example. I'm going to start with a GTO Wizard simulation, and then I'll present to you a simulation of my own. Okay, so for this example, I've chosen a cutoff versus big blind single raised pot. Now, cutoff opens, big blind calls, and I've chosen a chippy V spot. That way there's no rake, so there's nothing that's going to get in the way of the calculations. So I'm trying to present to you as pure of a scenario as we can get. But I've chosen a funky line. So the flop comes 5-4-3. Now, on this flop, Joey, do you like to range check, or do you donk out like the solver?
As the big blind, I end up checking a lot. I'd probably still check a lot here. Maybe lead out, maybe very small percentage time. Definitely not 60% of the time. No.
Yeah, this is something most people aren't finding. So most poker trading says check to the aggressor, but on very specific boards, such as 5-4-3, it's actually correct to lead out. And the reason is that you have a pretty good nut advantage here as the big blind, and if you were to range check, cutoff should check back most of the time. And so in order to prevent them from exploiting us by playing passively, we lead. And we'll say cutoff calls and get a 3 of spades. Again, I'm just going to go take this all the way down to the river. So should be barreling a decent chunk of the time on a 3, and then the 4 pairs. So we've got 5, 4, 4, 3, 3. A tricky spot indeed. Now, let's try this. Here, big blind bets 150% pot. What are your pot odds?
So I need to call. So the pot in the river is 14.5. He's going to bet 150. So
We can maybe even do it like,
okay.
so that's 21.8.
Okay, so I need to call 21.8 to win. Let's see here. So 22, 44, 54, 58, 58.5. So I got to call 21.8 to win 58.5.
Divided by 58.5. Okay. So you're saying you need about 37% equity.
So I need about 37% equity here to call.
Okay.
And the question is, how do we find that 37% equity?
Right. And so basically what this comes down to is, because in this spot our opponent is so polarized, are they bluffing enough? That's all we're really asking. And like, how often do they have to be bluffing in order for this to be good? So here we see this little chart on the side. And what this represents is the strength of the hand on the y-axis and all of the combos in your range by percentile on the x-axis. And so up here, we have, these are all of the big blind's nutted hands, and these are all of the big blind's bluffs. And so we can ask, how often are they bluffing? Well, it turns out it's 37% on the dot, right?
Okay.
So you can see at the bottom here, it says 37 right down there. And so what this means is that they're bluffing 37% of the time. So all of your, and here we can change this over to equity, strategy plus equity. So all of your hands that have about 37% equity are now mixing between folding and calling, right?
Oh, interesting.
Nines, tens, jacks, queens, ace, king, sixes, sevens, 7-5. All of these hands have about 37.5% equity, which is precisely the pot odds you need. Now, how does Big Blind accomplish this? Well, we can go over to the ranges tab. We can say, okay, what value hands are they betting? Okay, well, they have lots of boats and lots of straights, okay? And all of this together comprises about 63.5% their range. How often are they bluffing? Well, they're bluffing, about 37% of the time, right?
Mhm.
And that's just their no-made hand at king and king high here, which,
It's a lot of sixes and deuces.
yeah,
Hands that block a straight.
right. So this is what the solver's doing. Solver is betting precisely the right amount in order to make your hands indifferent. But here's a question for you, Joey. What were to happen if they're too value heavy? So let's take a look. Let's say, for example, I'm going to node lock something here. We're going to make them bet 150 with just a little bit of extra value. So let's try this. I want to highlight some of their boats here. Yeah. And you know what? We're just going to make them bet 150 with a few more boats. And maybe, you know what we do? We're going to take out some of their bluffs. We're going to make these hands check a little bit. So let's say that's Jack 7 doesn't bluff. I'm going to lock everything in place. And we're going to see how our strategy changes. So before I click this button, how do you think cutoff should respond now that Big Blind is betting a little more value heavy?
So Big Blind is betting a little more value heavy and less bluff, even though it was only, I guess, 4 combos. I
barely moved it, really.
barely
Just
moved it.
a little tiny bit.
I would imagine that we're calling significantly less, and I'm not sure maybe how you would think about that percentage, but I would imagine they're just folding a lot more.
Sharp instincts, yeah. Let's take a look.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
This always amazes me. This is
here's what's going on, right?
Yeah.
See, graphically, do you see this long flat line right here? This represents all of the bluff catchers in cutoff's range. And keep in mind that because Big Blind is representing some, either super strong or super weak hands, everything in between is a bluff catcher. So all the hands we have in between are bluff catchers. That includes straights, that includes pairs. So all of these hands now have 35% equity. And that means that they don't have the 37% equity required to call. So all I did was shift Big Blind's bluffs to be just a little bit too low. And now all of the bluff catchers fold, right? It doesn't take much because this is a very sensitive thing, especially on the river.
Mm.
And now we can try the opposite adjustment, right? So let's node lock this. And this time what I'm going to do is let's try putting some of these boats into a smaller bet line. Let's say that we're not betting 150 with these hands, and we'll make them bluff a little bit more too. And yeah, let's just have them bluff a little bit. Just a little bit more bluffs, not a lot, just a little bit. Okay, so
this is a real kind of player, because I think this is what you're gonna find. Some guys are a little bit over bluffed the river. Some people are a little bit under bluffing the river.
right, exactly. And so now when we put it in, now everything calls, right?
Wow.
Every single thing that can beat a bluff is now calling. And you can see all of these hands have about 41% equity, right? 41, 42. But keep in mind, these aren't like enormously profitable calls. These are like very slightly profitable calls. And before, they weren't like in the last example when they were all folding, those weren't all necessarily like, yes, this is the Like if you call, it's a terrible call. It's actually pretty close. It's just that the line is super sensitive. So if you bluff just a little bit more or a little bit less, you move away from indifference. And all of a sudden, the solver response is to always call or always fold. And so this is what is meant by pot odds, is that the pot odds dictate essentially how often you ought to be bluffing on the river. And that dictates how much equity your opponent's bluff catchers will have when you bet.
So you're saying that basically there's a way as the big blind to come to that number, and then you can kind of go through your range. But then also it seems like if I can know that maybe my hypothesis is you're calling with this range because you think I'm bluffing, then I stop bluffing you. Then I start to make you make these bad plays on the river because you're calling when you think you have 41% with tens, but I'm actually not bluffing you enough. But that's kind of where the game comes into it is
Sure. And like in reality, like is a human really capable of picking up on these minute differences? Like, could you actually detect if your opponent is bluffing, let's say 41% as opposed to 35%? Would you be able to physically pick up on that in a game? And the answer is probably not, right? The answer is probably not, because it's actually very hard to detect such things. But I've built a little bluff catching simulator that I think will test your skills on this.
Okay. Yeah, I've never seen the numbers displayed like this on the river to correlate it to that equity chart and then help you to come to a decision. It's a really different way to look at it.
Yeah, and we can also maybe even just see the concept of MDF here as well. Let's say they bet 150. So let's presume for a second that a big blind is bluffing when they bet 150, right? So they're risking 21.8. And how much do they get if cutoff folds? Well, they'll get the pot, which is 14.5. So risk divided by risk plus reward, 36. So we need about 60% fold equity in order to make bluffing profitable, right? And so what this means is that in order for big blind to have a profitable bluff, we need cutoff to fold about 60% of the time. That is the cutoff. And we can see that's exactly what's happening here, right? Cutoff is bluff is folding the correct percent of the time. And this means that big blind's bluffs are basically break even. So if we take a look at, let's say, the expected value of their trash, it's basically very, very close to zero, right? And this is, of course, because cutoff is always folding. So let's see what happens if cutoff is folding just a little bit more, just a touch more, right? And so let's say, they're not finding these big hero calls with, I actually think it's easier to find a call with sixes than it is like tens here. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd prefer to block the straight because as we already know that they're probably going to take this line with the straight. So, and that would be a normal line that they would lead to maybe 2-6 suited, 6-7 offsuit, 6-7 suited if they defended those. Yeah, ace. Yeah, I'd prefer to have the 6 or the 7 than maybe some of the 9s is kind of weird why they prefer 9s over 10s and 8s, but I'm sure there's something going on there because they seem to like the 9s because they're calling ace 9 and pocket 9. So I guess there's some sort of like reverse blockers going on here, and like kind of depends on what their bluffing range is. If it contains more, I guess if it contains more 10s, why? Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I'm sure there's something.
Sure, we could dive into the blocker effects for a second here. In practice, it's not a huge deal, but it really comes down to the scarcity of bluffs. And so if we take a look at the trash hands in their range here, they just don't have a whole lot of 9x to bluff with, right? So I'm gonna highlight all the 9s. They don't have a whole lot of 9x, but they do have some 8x, right? So they have like these offsuit hands are weighted much more heavily, and so they have more of these, let's say 6, 7, 8 type hands to bluff with. And so the amount of bluffs they have, the scarcity of different types of cards, largely determines what hands I should be bluff catching with. But in practice, this is not really worth diving into that much because in reality, people's ranges are so much more fuzzy than this. But okay, setting that aside, let's say they go all in, or they bet 150 here, action on cutoff. Now, I don't know about you, Joey, but I'm really gonna struggle to find a call with like ace queen, ace 9, like ace 7. I don't think I find ace 7 here. Do you?
Yeah, maybe mix and depending on the player, but probably not a pure. I don't think I'm pure calling any of these ace highs.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna go ahead and just like, yeah, we're gonna fold some of these. Now we can still say, okay, maybe they call with ace king, but all I've done is I've made them fold a few extra hands here, right? Not a lot, just a little bit. And we're going to lock all of that in place. We're going to see how Big Blind changes their strategy. So now Big Blind can anticipate that cutoff probably isn't finding enough calls here. You can see they're folding 65% as opposed to the 60% that they were supposed to have, right? So here, now we can see all of a sudden, all of these trash hands have all gone red. So now they should be bluff everything, right?
Maybe. Yeah. Interesting.
And it's because now all of a sudden, our bluffs are auto-profitable. So we had that calculation before, which is we're risking 21.8, or better yet, we can do it with pot percentage. So they're risking 150% of the pots to win the pot. And so then risk divided by risk plus reward, 60%, yeah. So we need them to fold 60% of the time, but they are actually folding 65%. Therefore, this is a profitable bluff. And so why would you check fold or check lose with some garbage? Like, let me take a look at, I'm going to go to the summary tab and actually just find, like, what's the worst garbage we have here? Twos, yeah, okay. Twos is nice because you block
Ace deuce.
Yeah. But yeah, like why would you check lose with twos or with any of these hands when you could just blast off and get some free fold equity, right? Even a hand like King 10, which has some, this hand still has some decent equity, can blast off here because cutoff is slightly overfolding. But in reality, like, how do you know your opponent is overfolding, right? That's much harder to detect. And so this is where usually you would study like what the population is doing and try and gather some data on this before you subjectively say, yep, they're overfolding here. Or you assess that your opponent is a nit and then you just, punish them.
And this is why the coaches nowadays talk about population is doing this here, so we can auto bluff here because population isn't calling enough in these spots based on the mass data analysis that a lot of people have done in the past couple of years.
That's right. That's right.
That makes a lot of sense. So they basically figured out, okay, they've gone through a program like the Wizard and they've figured out how much wider you can bluff in certain spots against certain types of players. And then you can build your database up of these are the places in the game that you could just close your eyes and bluff all your bottom of your range.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
And so what we do here with these type of mathematical equations is we're just describing with pot odds the risk reward of calling. And when it comes to MDF and alpha, all we're doing is describing the risk reward of bluffing. And these two things together determine how wide one should call. Okay. So
it sounds like bluffing is also equally as important. Just being able to have a feel for how they're defending your bluff and then equating that to the math, which then can equate to your range. I feel like that's one of the things I'm missing in real time in Hold'em is the ability to do that as the bluffer.
As the bluffer.
Yeah, as the bluffer, yeah. So I feel like as the caller, I sort of know if my opponent is bluffing me more, then I'm calling a bit wider, and the natural hands become top pair, good blocker, good reverse blockers, second pair, sometimes third pair with really good reverse blockers to what their bluffing range is going to be. And then if I think that they're under bluffing me, then I know that I can just fold most of my hands unless it's my best bluff catchers. But I don't really have like, okay, well now 60%, it's 60% here. So now I can kind of track that back visually to my range and visualize their range. And I think that's really a big thing I'm missing right now in the river.
Yeah. And so part of it comes down to figuring out like where in your range you are, right? So even if you know you're supposed to fold, let's say 60% of the time here, how do you know if you're in the top 40% of your range, right? And that kind of comes down to like, how good is my hand on this board? Like, am I in the top half of my range? Am I in the top quarter of my range? And that's something you can kind of play around with on Wizard to develop a better sense for. So as an example here, what I could do is I could just sort by EV. Okay, so figuring out where you are in your range. Here, I'd open up the breakdown tab and I would say, okay, if you have a hand like, if you're hand like fives here, you're at the very top of your range, right? What about a hand like ace 9?
Ace 9 is probably 37. I mean, most of those hands we just saw from that one breakdown, a lot of your ace highs are in just the break even, like the 37, 40-ish percentile of range. Maybe the best, I think maybe like ace 7 and ace 6 are a little bit better, a little bit higher. So I guess the ace 9 is a little bit lower than those hand ace highs that have a blocker to their value.
What I'm saying is in this chart here, it's smack dab in the middle of our range. So I'm not asking how much equity we have. I'm saying with these like decent ace-high type hands, where are we within all of the hands we could have?
Mm.
And these hands are kind of like smack dab in the middle of our range, right? And then we can get down to like near the bottom here. Let's say queen high. Now we're getting down to like the bottom quartile of our range, right?
Okay, I
So,
see.
like king high,
Good way
queen
to think
high,
about it.
etc. In here, it's a little bit weird because we're facing such a polarizing bet, but it becomes easier on earlier straights. And where I think this really shines is going to be like on the flop, for example. So let's say you want to defend the top 80% of your range. Well, just try and find the bottom 20% and fold that, right? Rather than everything else. So what's like the crappiest hands we can fold here? And here's where you can kind of like go through it and figure this out. Like, okay, what's the bottom 20% of our range? Okay, it's about king high, queen high, 9-7, etc. Anyway, that's maybe a lesson for another time. I haven't really prepared anything there. But what I'd like to do, Joey, is to try and give you some of the experience. Because, as you said, we have all of these tools and we have this theoretical sense of, okay, here's what the numbers are. But what we really need is experience, right? We need some type of hands-on trading. So what I've done is I've built you a little bluff catching simulator.
Oh, what is this?
Yeah, I've built game modes here. The first is pot odds trading. And so this one, we're going to show villain's bluffing tendency. And we're going to use that to determine whether or not we should call. And then in the second mode, we have guess the villain, which is where they're going to maintain a constant bluffing tendency. So they're either going to be always over bluffing or always under bluffing. And we want to try and deduce which one they are. Which mode would you like to try first, Joey?
Pot odds training, definitely.
All right, let's try some pot odds training. So let's try this. I'm going to set the pot to 100. So the minimum bet is 25, maximum bet is 200. And we'll say that the bluffing tendency is, let's say, plus or minus 10%. All right. Okay. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right, let's get into it. So here, villain has bet 116 into a pot of 100. This pot will remain constant. We have king, king. And so we have a pure bluff catcher. They either have aces or queens. So now we can see that their real bluff percentage is 35%. So they're bluffing 35% of the time. And they've bet 116. Should we call or should we fold?
Pretty sure that we should call here because if they're bluffing,
That's a reasonable guess.
yeah.
So let's see. They're betting 116 divided by the pot after we call. So they ought to be bluffing 34.9% of the time. They're actually bluffing 35%, which is pretty close, but this is still a profitable call, right?
Right. How would you figure this out in real time if you were facing? Do you like know this?
Do I know that my opponent is bluffing 35.4% of the time?
Know this number straight away? Like the guy bets 160 into 100. Is it you personally? Do you just automatically know what percentage you need in every bet size on the river? And then
That's a great question, Joey. So what I do is I make little charts that give me some pinpoint numbers. So I've got like, in fact, we can maybe just make one of these together. I'm going to open up, make a new spreadsheet here. And here we're going to have bet size and pot odds. Okay. And bet size, let's say 10% plus 10% downwards.
okay, you're a spreadsheet god. I can tell. Okay.
So the pot odds is just equal to this divided by 2 times that plus 1. And we'll make these into a percentage.
Okay. You're cooking.
And you know what, maybe let's make it a bit bigger so it's more readable. Okay, so just like that, we have some common markers. So what I would probably do is just memorize a few of these common points. So let's say 150, 200. So I basically just have these memorized here. I just memorize like, okay, 150 is 37.5, 200 is 40%, 100 is 33.3, 50 is 25, etc. And it's also kind of nice to have a little graph here to see how it changes with the bet size. And you can see it goes up quickly at first, and then like the pot odds kind of levels off. And if we add more and more, it'll go on to a long flat line as it approaches some asymptote. So this is how I do it, Joey. I just kind of memorize a few different things.
So you are saying that you basically have an idea that for certain sizes, for 50% of the pot, 25%, if it's between 50 and 100, 100's 33%. So you're able to just adjust in there in real time, and then you're able to equate that to where you're at in your range with the hand that you have, and then that's an aid you can potentially use to make your real-time decision. I think
honestly, like if you just practice like doing stuff like this for like an hour, you like with a little chart next to you get really good at it. It's like you just kind of burn it into your brain, and then you can figure it out pretty precisely.
perfect.
But
That's
let's try this one. So this one, we're not going to see their bluffing frequency, we just have to kind of deduce based on how well.
Oh no.
Yeah. So in fact, let's up the difficulty. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make it so that they always bet, let's say half pot, so 15 to 100.
Okay.
Okay, and so their bluffing tendency is going to be static. It's going to be plus or minus 10%, but it's going to be the same throughout the entire game. And so we got to figure out together, Joey, if they are. Oof. Okay, so I called. That was painful, and we lost. So I want to figure out if they're over bluffing for this half pot size or if they're under bluffing. So I'm going to call again and lose again. Okay, so my fold button is broken, and oh, there goes my car payment. That's 3 in a row. That's really bad. So Joey, please tell me, how often should we be winning here? What do you think?
How often should we be winning here? We should be winning about 25% of the time. So one every 4 times.
Okay, well, we've just lost like 5 in a row,
Okay.
6 in a row.
We could deduce that they're under bluffing, which means we always fold with kings here then.
Okay, well, let's end the game and guess that they're under bluffing here, because we just lost a bunch of times. So we're gonna say they're under bluffing, and they were actually over bluffing by 4.5%.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just that our sample size was too small, right?
right.
We're supposed to lose we're supposed to win maybe a quarter of the time there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we just they got a hot streak. That's all. So if we try this again, yeah. In fact, this time what we're gonna do is I'm gonna just let them bet any size from, let's say, 25 to 150. Okay. So this time the bet size is going to vary, but they're either going to be constantly under or over bluffing by some percentage. And this is random. Like, I haven't determined this. I don't know. But let's go through it. So here they're betting about a pot size bet. We should win about a third of the time. Okay. We lost. Sure. All right. Here they bet a half pot bet. We should win about a quarter of the time. And we did win. Okay. And here they've overbet. Pot size is 100. So how often should we be winning, Joey?
We need 37%. And then how often should we be winning? Then we should be winning 37%, I guess. Is that the
yeah, that's the right answer. Yeah.
Are we looking, I don't know, for a fraction here or an equation?
Yeah. But it's dead aces. Okay, so now they've bet about 150% again, which means we expect to win about 37.5% of the time. No. Now they bet 74 into 100.
You need about 30.
Yes, correct. 30. Now they bet 139 into 100. So we
about 35.
35, yeah, about 35.
I'm getting the scale.
You're getting pretty good at this, Joey. You're getting pretty good at this. 69 to 100, about 30% of the time.
30%, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So do we think this is a big enough sample size to say that this player is under bluffing?
Definitely not. No.
Okay. Let's find out. Actually over bluffing significantly, which I think we just kind of ran into it there. But yeah. So this is kind of the pain of this. And so even though we might know mathematically what is correct, until you actually have some hands-on experience and you realize, like, okay, yeah, calling a quarter pot bet involves losing the vast majority of the time. And you could lose 7 times in a row, and that's completely normal and expected. But until you actually experience that, you might feel kind of dumb. And so this is why the qualia of bluff catching, like the experience of it, is important. And if anyone watching this video wants to try this, I'll put a link to this little simulator in the description. You can go and play around with it, give it a try.
Perfect. Yeah, this is cool. This looks like it's got a lot of potential to build this out. This is really cool.
Anyway, I think that's my video, Joey. Hope you liked it. Hope you got something out of it.
Oh yeah, I did. I've now learned how to equate a bet size percentage to a number. And now I will be working in the wizard to equate that number to where that might fall in my range. And then I'm going to be working on understanding how that number changes in terms of like what the hand equates to, depending on over bluffing and under bluffing tendencies, and then work on identifying that in real time. And then the next time we talk, I'll have this down and you'll be like, whoa, okay.
Nice.
That's my goal. Yeah, that definitely learned a lot. This is exactly what I was looking for.
Great. I'm so happy I could help, Joey. It was a pleasure to have you on. And if anyone else wants to go learn some more poker math, I'd recommend watching this video next. Lots of good poker math tips in there for you. Joey, thanks so much for giving my little simulator a try. And as always, if you have any poker math questions, feel free to hit me up.
Thanks, Tombos.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.